Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 173 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. February is winding down as this episode is released, so it's time for the monthly shoutout to my patrons. This month, that list is as follows: Mike Sterling, Justin Bailey, Lily Breen, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Aaron Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint. I truly appreciate all of you for your support. And if you want to join in with helping the show out, it's just $1 per month, and that gets you this monthly shoutout, as well as audio outtakes and full scripts of every written show. Now, getting into this week's episode, judging from the box office results, I'd say the chances are pretty good that you did not see Madam Web in theaters. While I won't say it's a good movie, I will say it's a fun movie that throws back to the 90s era of movie adaptations of comic book characters, and all that entails. So if you enjoyed watching the Ben Affleck Daredevil, the first Fantastic Four movie, check out episode 67 for more detailed thoughts on that. Or Steel, you might want to check this out as well. But this isn't a movie review show, so that's going to be the end of my thoughts on that. Instead, I thought this was a good opportunity to look at the heroines of the movie and what their comic book history is like. We'll start with the title character, Madam Web herself, played by Dakota Johnson in the film. Cassandra Webb is a character who was first introduced in November of 1980, appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 210, written by Denny O'Neil and drawn by John Romita Jr., both legends in their respective fields. Unlike her movie origin, which involves Peruvian spiders, Cassandra in the comics is a mutant with powers of precognition, clairvoyance, and telepathy. These mental powers let her act as a guide for other heroes, mainly Spider-Man and other spider-related characters. Her physical body is stuck in a life support system that resembles a web, as she is suffering from myasthenia gravis, a real autoimmune disease that affects the nerves and muscles, also causing her blindness. She was always illustrated as a much older woman, which makes the fact that the birth year presented in the movie places her at just a year older than me quite disturbing. One of the most well-known Spider-Man stories, where Spidey fights the Juggernaut in a 2-issue arc by Roger Stern and John Romita Jr., also features Madam Web prominently, as Juggernaut is trying to capture her at Black Tom Cassidy's behest, in order for them to use her abilities against their foes, the X-Men. While Madam Web was used as a supporting character on and off in the 80s, she mostly disappeared for a time, but her appearance in the 90s Spider-Man animated show possibly inspired the comic writers to bring her back. She was briefly restored to a younger age as a result of the ritual called the Gathering of the Five. We'll talk about that more in detail when we get to one of the other characters in this episode. That de-aging did not last long for unknown reasons, as we see her in Amazing Spider-Man number 600 once again as an older woman with her precognitive powers revealing to her that someone is hunting spiders. This led into the Grim Hunt storyline, where members of the Kravenov family were capturing and hunting down many animal-themed characters, including, of course, many of the Spider family. During this story, Madam Web was killed, but before she died, was somehow able to pass her powers on. Who received them? Well, none other than the next character to discuss, Julia Carpenter. Julia Carpenter, her married name, she's still Julia Cornwall in the film, where she's portrayed by Sydney Sweeney, made her first full appearance in Secret Wars number 7, after a brief cameo in the previous issue. While we don't learn her origins until much later, she was a result of government experiments in trying to create superheroes. Due to a mixture of spider venom and exotic plant extracts, Julia gained powers fairly similar to Spider-Man's, able to wall crawl and with superhuman agility and strength. She even gained the ability to create webs of psionic energy, thus referred to as psi-webs in the comics, which can hold up to 10 tons of weight once set in place. Julia wears a black costume with a white spider design and takes on the name Spider-Woman. The original Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew, had been killed, and while she was resurrected before Julia's first appearance, she was no longer active as a superhero at the time. When Spider-Man uses a machine to create what he thinks is a new costume, later revealed to be the Venom symbiote, in Secret Wars number 8, he assumes that he was subconsciously inspired by Julia's outfit. After returning from Battleworld at the end of the Secret Wars story, Julia briefly joined the government-backed team known as Freedom Force, but left when she discovered the missions were more extra-legal than she wanted. She was a recurring guest and then a regular cast member of the West Coast Avengers and the ForceWorks team that was basically a continuation, similar to how X-Force came out of the New Mutants title. She also had her own solo series, where she fought a team of other spider-powered people named Deathweb. While she lost her powers at the hands of another Spider-Woman, this one a villainous version whose real name was Charlotte Witter and was actually the granddaughter of Cassandra Webb, she later regained her abilities and took on the codename of Arachne, as Spider-Woman was now being used by another character we'll get to in a moment. During the Civil War storyline, much like her Distaff counterpart, Julia played both sides of the conflict, acting as a double agent. While she herself registered and worked on Iron Man's team, she secretly tipped off some of those heroes who refused to sign on and allowed them to escape arrest. Her subterfuge was discovered when one of those she tipped off, the Prowler, was later caught and interrogated, leading to her own arrest. Like most of the heroes on the anti-registration side, she has been forgiven, and since then has had her life upended when Cassandra Webb perished and passed her powers, and blindness, on to Julia, making her the new Madam Web. In this persona, Julia wears a red trench coat, taking on a more noir appearance than either her predecessor or her previous costumed persona. Because of this costume being very similar to what Dakota Johnson was seen wearing in set photos and the actress's age, I assumed that this was the Madam Web we were going to get in the movie, until later press releases said otherwise. As the new Madam Web, Julia has once again helped Spider-Man, particularly in the Spider Island and End of the Spider-Verse stories. Next up in the lineup, we have Maddie Franklin, played by Celeste O'Connor in the Madam Web film. She briefly appeared in shadow in Spectacular Spider-Man number 262 before getting her first full appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 441. Her father, Jerry Franklin, was originally invited to be part of the Gathering of the Five, a ritual in which, at a certain time, an artifact that has been split into 5 pieces could be put together, with each shard granting the holder one of 5 gifts: knowledge, power, immortality, insanity, or death. Maddie overheard the invitation and showed up in his stead, desperate to get out from under his thumb. Maddie was lucky enough to receive the power during the ritual. Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, went insane, even more than he already was, and this was the ritual that restored Madam Web to her youth, granting her immortality, which, as I mentioned, apparently wore off at some point, so not really the greatest of gifts there. Morris Maxwell, who received knowledge, was a supporting character in Maddie's own title, while Gregory Hurd was gifted with death, though not instantly. Being a big fan of superheroes in general, and Spider-Man in particular, Maddie at first dressed herself in a padded Spider-Man costume to disguise her gender. At the time, Spider-Man was retired, making Maddie a brief replacement. After meeting the original, who came out of retirement fairly quickly, she then took on the name Spider-Woman, graduating to her own ongoing series, though it lasted only 18 issues, where she moved in with her uncle, J. Jonah Jameson. This relationship is briefly referenced in the movie. After her original series was over, Maddie had a few dark stories told about her in other books. In Alias, the adult-only title starring Jessica Jones, Maddie was date raped after being slipped drugs in her drink, then taken by a drug dealer who keeps her sedated in order to use her both for her powers, taking blood to create a drug called MGH, or mutant growth hormone, and as an unwitting prostitute. She's eventually rescued by Jessica and goes into counseling to recover from her new dependence on the drugs she had been continuously given. After that, she briefly puts on the costume once again to track down the dealers who were selling MGH, tracking them down to LA. While there, she gets involved in a group of former teenage heroes who act as a support group. While the group's purpose is to help each other stay out of the superhero life, she secretly recruits two of the members, Darkhawk and Ricochet, to help her with her mission. Things go wrong, leading to hurt feelings all around. This story is told in the Loners miniseries. Maddie's story comes to an end in the Grim Hunt storyline mentioned in both Cassandra and Julia's history as well. Maddie is killed in a sacrificial ritual aimed at reviving one of the Kravenov family. She was seen once subsequently as a clone in the Clone Conspiracy storyline, but she and all of the other clones, save one, were disintegrated at the end of that arc. I wish more had been done with Maddie, because in her early appearances, it feels like the creators may have been going for a transgender story, as Maddie insists on being called Matt in some of her earliest dialogue, and as mentioned, dressed as Spider-Man in her first costume appearances. However, later writers seem to have dropped this, as she's never referred to as Matt in her ongoing title or later appearances. Perhaps if they had been created today rather than in 1999, their story would have gone differently. Finally, we have Anya Corazon, portrayed by Isabella Merced in the Madame Web film. Unlike Julia and Maddie, Anya did not start her superhero career as Spider-Woman, and in fact has never used that moniker. Anya was originally a normal girl who happened to be caught in the crossfire of a battle between two mystical clans, the Spider Society and the Sisterhood of the Wasp. She was nearly killed during the fight, but one of these Spider Society members performed a ritual that healed her and gave her spider-like powers, as well as a spider-shaped tattoo and an exoskeleton which granted additional abilities. She's recruited by the Society to become their hunter, and from her Latin heritage, she has a Puerto Rican father and Mexican mother, chooses the name Araña, spider in Spanish. This origin and her first story took place in the first 6 issues of Amazing Fantasy Volume 2, which came out in 2004. Volume 1 ended in 1962 with issue number 15, which was the very first appearance of Spider-Man. After that arc, and a 12-issue miniseries, split into 2 6-issue arcs, Anya's ties to the Spider Society are removed in a one-shot titled Spider-Man Araña, The Hunter Revealed, at the end of which she learns she was never a true hunter and passes that mantle on to another member of the society named Nina. Still having the powers from her exoskeleton, she joins the pro-registration side during the Civil War. but during a fight with a character named Doomsday Man, not Doomsday, the DC character who killed Superman, she has her exoskeleton ripped from her, taking the rest of her superpowers away. Despite not having any powers, Julia Carpenter handed down her original black costume to Anya at the end of the Grim Hunt story after receiving Madam Web's powers. Anya had been the intended sacrifice that Maddie ended up being, but was rescued by Julia along with Spider-Man, Madam Web, and the Spider-Man clone known as Kane. Wearing this new costume and using her inherent athletic ability, Anya became known as Spider-Girl, mostly teaming up with a team of other teenage heroes known as the Young Allies. Anya regained spider powers during the Spider Island story, in which much of Manhattan gained Spider-Man's powers, later mutating into spider creatures under the control of a character known as the Spider Queen. While she and the rest of the island were cured, perhaps due to her previous connection to the spider totems, Anya retained some of her powers, and went on to show up in Avengers Academy, then the Spider-Verse storyline and the 2015 Secret Wars, where she and other spider-related characters joined up to become the Web Warriors, a team of multiverse-traveling heroes who help keep the web of life intact, which also includes Spider-Ham, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Man of India, among others. Yes, Anya does show up briefly in the Across the Spider-Verse movie, but she doesn't get any lines. Perhaps in the next one. So that's a brief rundown of the characters you probably missed by not seeing Madam Web, although most of them only get brief appearances in costume as a flash forward, and spend the rest of the time powerless and out of costume, as the movie mostly focuses on Cassandra herself and her revamped origin. If there are other, more obscure characters you'd like to learn about, or you have other ideas for a future topic, I'm always open to suggestions. You can email those, or comments on the show in general, to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown, Twitter @geektownpodcast, Mastodon @welcome-to-geektown @mastodon.social, or Blue Sky @welcome-to-geektown.bluesky.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.